Good morning, Math 095. I'm going to make a couple of quick videos. This one's just going to be on section 3.1, which begins today. And section 3.1 is on ordered pairs. And ordered pairs are just the x and the y. We've solved two variables already with an x, and some with an x and a y, and some we've just solved for y. But the key things to remember on these are the x is always the first, just like it is in the alphabet, and the y is always the second, just like it follows in the alphabet. Now, looking at these, when you graph these out, there are four quadrants. The axis that runs horizontal is always the x-axis. The one that runs vertical is always called the y-axis, and that is just where you graph your x and your y's. Now I'll be sending there'll be graphing paper to actually do this with, so I'm going to just draw mine out. When we graph these coordinates, always just label x and y. You don't have to do that, but it just helps me keep things straight. And then everything to the right of this line is a positive number. Everything to the left is a negative number. So everything on this side, the x will be a positive. Everything that goes up, and if you try to keep things upright, that means you try to be positive. Everything in this quadrant will be positive x and a positive y. So the x's and the y's will both be positive. In this particular quadrant, everything will be negative that is x. So this one will be a negative x, but everything will be positive, so it will be a positive y. Now, if we move down to the other quadrant, these will all be negative, and everything below the line will also be negative. So everything in this quadrant will be negative x and then negative y. Now, if it doesn't actually fall in the quadrant and it falls on the line, it's always equal. One of them will be equal to a 0. And then the last quadrant, which is here, everything will be a positive x and everything will be a negative y. So you can kind of see the difference. If I was to label these quadrants, this would be quadrant 1. And then it just goes counterclockwise, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and then of course the last one would be quadrant 4. So the first part of the homework, it will ask you which quadrant that you are going to be in, and then to graph those out. So for graphing these, if I want to graph, and let's say I want it to be a 3 and a negative 2. Well, the first thing I need to realize is which quadrant that it would be in. Because this is a positive and this is a negative, I know it has to be in this quadrant. So if I was to label these numbers, this would be 1, 2, and 3. So if I'm graphing 3, I would just count over 1, 2, and 3. That would be my first point. Then I come down 2. Because it's a negative number, I go down. This will be negative 1, and this will be negative 2. So I've already came over 3, and then I come down 2. So my spot will be exactly here. Generally, these are labeled by a point, such as point A, or you can list them by the actual numbers, which would be 3 and negative 2. Either one of these are acceptable. If I was to graph another one, and let's just use another random number for an example, negative 4 and negative 2. Once again, it's going to be negative numbers this way. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, and negative 4. We already know that these are negative numbers as well, so I go 1, 2, 3, 4, down 2, 1, 2. So this one would just be labeled negative 4, negative 2. You can see this one will be in quadrant 4, and this one will be in quadrant 3. And remember, when you graph these, you always graph the x first and the y second. It's just like a ladder. If you're going to use a ladder, you move it left and right first, and then you go up and down. You don't go up and down the ladder and then try to move it side to side. That would be unsafe. So remember, just use the ladder approach.